I'd like to thank our chairman today, Congressman Tim Huelskamp, Congressman Jim Jordan, Congressman Raúl Labrador, and the other members of Congress who have joined us. For those of you who are tweeting, I encourage you to follow @Conversations on Twitter and use the hashtag CWC114. We're going to go ahead and I'll ask the first question. Then if you could raise your hand and identify yourselves when you want a question, I'll call on you, and the members of Congress will answer your questions. We will have a recording of this event available on YouTube following later today. Congressman, obviously tragic events overseas in Paris, France. There's been a debate here. Some of you are actively engaged on the Syrian refugees. Before we open it up to the reporters in the room, do any of you want to make any comments about the terrorist attacks and the current situation here at home?
Obviously I apologize, I'm sick today, so I may speak less than usual, but our hearts and our minds and our condolences go to the people of Paris, of France, and we do need to look at this issue very seriously in the United States. We need to figure out who is here. We are a nation that is very welcoming of immigrants, has always been welcoming of refugees, but we have always made sure that the people that are coming are people that we can trust and that we can properly vet. I had a hearing 2 weeks ago with the FBI director, and I asked him specifically whether he could assure the people in my district that the people that are coming here from Syria have been properly vetted, and he said that we don't have the proper mechanisms right now, and the most important thing, we don't have the proper data on these failed nations and these failed states. We don't have the proper intelligence to know whether these people, who they are, and whether they will do us harm. So no, he could not assure the people of my district that all the people will have the proper vetting. So it's something that we have to think about seriously, but at the same time, we also have to make sure that we don't allow the terrorists to change the nature of who we are as a nation.
During the past week, I hosted 10 town halls across my district in Kansas, and these were all before the terrorist attack, and that was a key question. They were worried. And if you ask my constituents, do you think we're adequately vetting current refugees, the answer is they don't know, and they don't believe so. And so this issue was there long before the terrorist attack in France and in Beirut as well. But I cannot assure them. I don't think the president's doing everything he can, and I hearken back to a couple international adoptions my wife and I were involved in. The background check we went through in order to bring a 2-year-old girl to this country was stunning. And to think refugees coming in that are adults from countries that are full of ISIS sympathizers and ISIS terrorists were not doing even that type of background check that we were requiring of adopting little girls from other countries. So you put those two and two together and you wonder, can we do better? Absolutely. And we have a long ways to go, but the problem's been there. The president's I think has failed his duty, and to suggest that everything's fine and dandy, we learned in Paris, that's definitely not the case. And so I can't honestly tell my constituents that this administration is doing everything they can to properly vet these quote-unquote refugees.
And among the most humanitarian things we can do is not always to bring these refugees to our country. It's to provide the millions of dollars that the United States is providing now to help those refugees stay closer to home, to maintain those ties to the place they came from, and to prepare themselves to be able to go back and be equipped to defend their homeland. The United States spends tens of millions of dollars to do this. I would refer members of the press that are here today to Congressman Kay Granger of Texas, who reminded us this morning in conference to that fact. And you can get more detail on actually how much money we're spending to help people remain closer to home, but still be safe and equipped to return to their homeland eventually.
Rob, I'd like to speak very quickly on this. The number of phone calls that we have been getting over the last few days, it doesn't quite rival the bailout of Wall Street, but it's pretty close. The frustration of the American people is the fact that we continue to not, I think we need a moratorium. I think the Congress ought to say to the President, we're not going to take anybody in for the next 3, 4, 5 months. I don't know what it needs to be, but I think we need to get a handle on the process so that we're not overwhelmed.
Thank you. Yes.
I would like to point out that even though a more comprehensive check of the backgrounds of the refugees who are coming to this country might be a necessary step, it's not sufficient to preventing the influx of terrorists. 1993 should have been a wake-up call. If you remember the first time the World Trade Center was bombed, those were Jordanians, Palestinians, Egyptians. They came in on a combination of fake passports and or overstayed student or tourist visas. And then in 2011, all 19 of the hijackers were Saudi Arabian. They were Saudi nationals, and they came in on legal visas. And we didn't do anything and haven't done anything at the time to prevent that from happening again. So I just want to encourage people to take a broader view of this. This is more than just about Syria, and it's not just about refugees.
Let me also add my take on this. 3 things, Rob. First of all, Jeff Sessions chaired the Subcommittee on Immigration and National Interest. They have identified 26 foreign-born individuals in the United States in the last year alone charged with and or convicted of terrorism. That's 26 in the last year alone. What did it take in Paris? Only 8. Secondly, some cost estimates put the cost of resettling 10,000 refugees averaging out to about $6.5 billion per refugee over their lifespan. That comes up to about $55 billion if you figure President Obama wants about 10,000 refugees in here. And thirdly, let me just say that there's been a lot of discussion about sanctuary cities. Under the administration's current foreign policy initiative of bringing in Syrian-born refugees that we can't test by our own intelligence agency's estimation alone to know for sure what their background is, we've already got sanctuary cities. We are in danger, America, of becoming, let's just call it a sanctuary country, if you will, at this rate, without being able to test the background of those individuals. And why should American citizens like Kate Steinle pay the ultimate price with their life for an ill-conceived, ill-advised immigration policy? It's foolishness. I yield back.
Okay, let's open it up to the floor for questions. I'd like to lead off. Yes, and please remember to state your name and affiliation.
Paul Singer with USA Today. Paul Singer with USA Today. Congressman Massey, that's an interesting point. So then what? I mean, does that mean that we close the border to anybody from anywhere?
No, I just make that point to say that the attention is all focused on this today, and it's not going to solve the problem. And I hate to, well, actually, I want to broaden this discussion. We're under the illusion that bad people with guns are going to be nice to good people without guns. And I think when you look at the reason this happened in France, if it happens in the United States, it's going to happen in a gun-free zone. And this is part of the larger discussion. Why did it happen in France? Why hasn't it happened in the U.S.? That's not to say it couldn't happen here. But if we want to prevent terrorist acts like this or attenuate their the fatalities, we have to look at the bigger picture. And I don't think you're going to solve it with anything we pass this week. I guess that's my bigger point, is that there's a lot of pressure on Congress to do something right now this week, and I'm sure we will do something, but I'm not confident that it is going to solve the problem, and it could create other problems.
One thing Congress will likely do this week is send the NDAA to the president, and there's a requirement therein that the president actually comes up with a strategy to deal with terrorism, particularly that related to ISIS. Certainly, we're in a situation where there is no clear, if any, strategy. If there was one, you'd have to call it the only thing you can call it is a failed strategy. And so the president needs to step up, and he was obviously wrong on Friday. He's been wrong multiple times, and we can't lead one at a time from Congress. We will continue to send messages, but at the end of the day, the commander-in-chief has to do his job, and I cannot assure my constituents in Kansas that we're secure. And for him to suggest anything other than that is misleading the American people.
Rob, to Tim's point, we had Barbara Lee and myself and Jim McGovern wrote the new Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, and asked him to please allow Congress to bring up a new AUMF, Authorization of Military Force. We had Boehner in 2014 said that we will not debate, and this is before all this broke loose in France. He said that he would not let us have a debate on the floor of the House about Syria until the president submitted an AUMF. In February of this year, 2015, President Obama sent us an AUMF. Nothing has ever been done with it. I believe that the Constitution, and especially Madison, is the one that said it is the legislative branch's responsibility, I'm paraphrasing now, to debate and to discuss whether there should be a declaration of war or not. So we need to get our Speaker of the House, with all this that's breaking loose around the world, to let the Congress meet its constitutional responsibility and bring forward a AUMF, and let's have a debate about what should be our role and our position in the world that we live in, the world of chaos.
And if I may, Paul, you asked Representative Massey what the answer is, and I was the vice chairman of the Borders Committee in the Texas legislature, and I know firsthand how open our porous borders are on the south part of our country. I can tell you this, that the answer is not just inviting a flow of people over here that we cannot thoroughly vet. And I would add, part of the underlying problem here is that the countries around Syria and some of the others who have the financial means don't want them in their countries. And one of the answers may be, and I've said this about Syria, pardon me, about fighting ISIL, unless this administration builds a coalition of communities in that neighborhood that are going to be there to clean up if we do have to go on there and eradicate what I call the roach pile, then they need a coalition of communities that are ready, willing, and able to stand up with an exit strategy. And I would encourage the president not to hold his strategy sessions in the media. You don't tell your enemy what you will or won't do. But you go to the Saudis and you go to the Qataris and you go to all those countries over there and you say, look, it's about time y'all stepped up to the plate. They're a lot closer than we are, or they have a lot to lose. And they ought to be the ones to step up and put in, call it what you want, tent cities, facilities. If the United States wants to supply some aid in the way of money, let them keep those people close to home, like Kay Granger said this morning, and let those countries be part of the solution. Right now, I don't see them stepping up. There's an underlying problem there that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I just want to add on the big picture, what should we do as well? I mean, it's interesting, the President of the United States is kind of a creature of the faculty lounge. And so if you look at our universities, says the professor, I'm going to get to that. And if you look
at least he hadn't lost his faculties.
That's right. That's Texas humor. That's pretty good. Now I've got to re-clarify my thought. Thank you. These are my friends, you can tell. So anyway, you can see chaos in the university right now, right, across the country, and a miseducation of kids from K to 12 and higher ed. Usually I'm up here speaking on the budget and economics and pushing free markets. I worked at the World Bank 20 years ago, and I usually say if you want to help the poor, the best way to help the poor is to spread free markets. The Chinese and the Indians have gone from $1,000 a year to $8,000 or $9,000 a year. The biggest welfare improvements imaginable, dwarf any public policy, right? And so that's the usual economics up here in the budgets and what we can do to really help people and be compassionate to the world. And now the same thing. When it comes to foreign policy, what are we teaching our kids about foreign policy in K-12 and in higher ed, and about the preservation of the values and institutions and the rule of law that we should have in place in this country? And the day that we reach the point where we say, let's just be compassionate at the expense of the American people and our national security, is a major problem. And so we mentioned Senator Sessions on immigration policy. He's got kind of a common sense proposal. Let's do what's in the best interest of our national interest and the American citizens on immigration policy. Well, why wouldn't you do the same thing when it comes to foreign policy and ask those questions? You first of all have to defend yourself so you have a country that can help other countries. And a lot of this is cultural. And we're going to see how this goes. Luckily, I think we're all getting phone calls into our office still, right? So the average American is still right, engaged. But the leftist drift that you can just be infinitely compassionate without concern to your own self-interest, I think is just misguided. And so we need to get back to basics at K-12 and higher ed and re-engage in some of these critical cultural conversations on free markets, the rule of law, and our national interests.
Paul, just quickly, and this is to Walter's point about the AUMF, I think as lawmakers and the ones responsible for declaring war or not declaring war, we need to look at what America has done to cause the 4 million refugees that are emanating from Syria, and also the refugees that have come here from Iraq. And we need to reflect on that as well and consider whether any activities that we're contemplating now are going to exacerbate that problem in the Middle East.
Thank you. Question over here. Yes, in the back.
I've heard a lot of your colleagues.
Your name and affiliation.
Gabrielle Levy, U.S. News and World Report. A lot of your colleagues, including some of you, have said that in order to let some of the refugees in, we have to make sure that we're hitting a standard of confidence that the terrorists are not going to be infiltrating this group of refugees. Can you describe a little bit more what that level of confidence will actually look like, and how would we even know that we've reached it? And if not, is this just a way of setting the bar so high that Syrian refugees will never be able to come into the country?
You know, for me, the level of confidence is pretty simple. I have 4 quotes here from Director Comey. When I asked him regarding the database that they use in Syria versus the database that they used in Iraq, he said, I would say that we have a less robust data set dramatically than we had with Iraq, so it will be difficult. So for me, at a minimum, I need the FBI director to be confident that the data that he's using in these reports and in these vetting processes is actually something that he can be confident about. When I asked him, what can the FBI do to improve the security checks for refugees originating from failed states, he said, that's one I don't have a good answer for. When I asked him about giving me assurances of what he would do with what I can tell my constituents back home, can I go back home and give them an assurance that the vetting process has worked? He says, what you can assure them is that we will work day and night to make sure that if there's information available about somebody, we have surfaced it and we have evaluated it. However, I can't sit here and offer anybody an absolute assurance that there is no risk associated with this. So for me, at a minimum, is that the representative of this administration can tell me that he can give me new answers to these questions. So it's not just about setting the bar so high. We have been a great country where we have accepted people from Iraq, we have accepted people from all over the world. But every one of those instances, we were told by the people who were doing the security clearances that they had sufficient information and sufficient intelligence. They're telling us that in these failed states, we don't have sufficient information. So my number one responsibility is to protect the people in my district and to protect the people of the United States.
Yes. Front row here in blue.
Hi, I'm Christina Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. Could you share some of your impressions about Paul Ryan as the new speaker? Do you think the process has changed? You know, how is it going so far?
I think he's trying to turn a battleship, and it's going to take a long time. And I want to give him a lot of credit here for saying the right things and trying to do the right things at this point.
I'm extremely pleased with the approach that he is taking. I served, when I first arrived here, under his leadership on the Budget Committee, and I see him as the same person today that he was then in terms of the issues that he wants to approach. I think he's been as frustrated as many of us have been, that the Republicans' better ideas have not gotten to the floor of the House for discussion. We do have what we see as better solutions on ways to save our entitlement programs as opposed to letting them go on autopilot until they're insolvent. We do think we have better solutions when it comes to health care. We want an opportunity to bring those conversations to the floor of the House. I believe you'll see those conversations come to the floor of the House under Paul Ryan's leadership, and that the hesitation to provide an alternative will go away. Republicans are not the party of no. We are the party of better ideas. Why don't we show the American people what we're all about? And I believe that you'll see that under Paul Ryan. I also want to compliment the manner in which he addressed my biggest concern, which was that Congress had become a command and control, reward and punishment organization with regard to its own rank and file members. Paul Ryan, I think, chafed under that system as well, even though he wasn't as renegade as some of the people you see on the podium here today, on the dais. And I'm proud to be sitting up here with you because of that.
Christine, if will the gentlelady yield?
I will yield.
If I may add, you know, Americans are mad. You can prove that with 2 words: Donald Trump. Americans are tired. Pardon me. President Obama has been getting his way with the Republican House and Republican Senate. And you can go right down the list with Obamacare, with out-of-control spending, $20 trillion. Abortion on demand, paid for with tax dollars. You can go through the same-sex marriage argument, the Iranian nuclear giveaway. America is in full retreat, the lowest military in a long time, and it's showing up in Syria, Middle East, and around the world. Overregulation by federal agencies, call it the EPA, with their rule promulgating, the IRS, who actually targeted conservatives. You can look at a Senate that still blocks everything with Harry Reid at the reins. Illegal amnesty down on the Texas-Mexico border, the American-Mexico border. So the president has been getting his way for a long time, and Americans are mad. I'm encouraged, as one of the 9 who voted for Daniel Webster, did not vote for Paul. I've had that conversation with him. I'm encouraged that Paul is going to be a good speaker. The lady from Wyoming is exactly correct. And so is the gentleman over here. He's turning a large battleship. But everything I see says that what we actually, some people say the Republican conference is broke. Well, no, it's not. We're making adjustments. We're proving that we have people in place, rules in place that say we realize we need an adjustment, and you're saying an adjustment get made. So I'm very, very encouraged that Paul Ryan is going to be a good speaker.
Reclaiming my time, there's another point I want to make about Paul. The committees will be re-empowered under his leadership. He's showing it already. And the rank and file will have more opportunity to provide amendments on the floor. You saw that already in the transportation bill. That was a long debate. It should have been a long debate. It's an important subject. The same will be true with other major pieces of legislation going forward. Furthermore, instead of seeing solutions that were crafted by non-members of Congress in leadership offices come to the floor without amendment or opportunity for debate, you're going to see legislation come out of the committees of jurisdiction. Where multiple committees have jurisdiction, he's putting together task forces made up of the committees of jurisdiction to take a more comprehensive approach to some of these solutions. I think it's a new day. I'm extremely encouraged, and as someone who, based on what I have seen from Paul Ryan, is leaving Congress, in part because the reforms I so hoped to see while I was here are finally going to be enacted. And I came here to help reform and not to just endure that has been the last 7 years. I see this great new day. So I think the glass is not only half full, but it is being filled to the brim.
Congressman Jones first. And then
Rob, very quickly, I hope and wish the best for Paul because our nation needs that kind of leadership. But I'm always reminded that he, Eric Cantor, and McCarthy made up the top gun. So I hope that relationship with Eric Cantor is not too tight. Knowing that this place operates on money, whether you be a Republican or Democrat, I hope that Paul can be the independent Speaker of the House that we need and not be obligated to these outside forces that I saw on so many of the decisions that got to the floor of the House. The last point I want to make is that I think that the conservatives in this country were very upset when we had the Trade Promotion Authority, TPA, and that Mr. Ryan was a strong advocate of TPA. So I hope that he will be independent, not dependent on his staff to drive him as John Boehner did, and bring this House back to become the people's House and not special interest House.
Congressman Bratt.
Yeah, I just want to add a footnote to the question and for the press. I know you won't report on this, but I'm going to say it anyway. 6 months or a year ago, some folks on this dais or et cetera, and in our groups were being called every name you can imagine by the press. No, this, worse names, et cetera. Cynthia just pointed out, in large part due to her and Jim Jordan and Raúl and Meadows and people of huge integrity, in a year, we've made tremendous changes already. And if you'll go back and look at your own writings, they're what we proposed 6 months to a year ago. I don't take any credit because I'm a rookie. But a lot of people have been working on this for years. And so if the press would go back and give credit where credit is due to the people who have been asking for this, you all in the press know up here, things just don't happen by saying, please pass the salt and pepper, right? Usually there's a little pushing that has to be done to change the institutions of this country, and a lot of these folks have taken that bitter medicine and taken the punches along the way in order to help the nation. And I'll just close with one piece of evidence on this. It's to show you how principled these people are. We just got our way on regular order and on the steering committee and a lot of the procedural moves we wanted. And no one in this group spiked the end zone in the football field, right? No one claimed credit. No one spiked the ball and tried to get adversarial. And the processes we just won made this group less powerful, right? So if you think that through, regular order with 240 so in the conference, and we're only 40 or 50, we weaken our own relative position. So that's a credit to the people that have been fighting on these issues for years, that they would weaken their own position for the benefit of the country to get this House moving in the right direction again. And so I just want to give these folks great credit.
Well, I was going to spike the football, but I won't now. I still think I've said this now for several weeks. I'm cautiously optimistic. The right rhetoric's being, it's being used. The right words are being used, but we need to see results. We're going to see this week, for example, we're going to be voting, or next week, or in a couple of weeks, on an education bill. All the amendments went into that education bill. Let's see what kind of product we get out. Is it a product that was, already baked before it even went to conference, or is it a product that the conference will have some influence over? So those things, I'm still waiting to see how those things work out. But I think you do sense a new feeling in the conference where people are more optimistic and more hopeful, and I hope that continues.
Great. Another question? Yes, Josh.
Hi, this is Josh Siegel with the Daily Signal. While we're talking about Paul Ryan and the refugees, I know today he talked about wanting to address the refugee situation. It sounded like he was leaning more towards standalone legislation and not dealing with it in appropriations. So would that be enough for you to, kind of deal with this now and not bring it into the appropriations fight later on?
I don't know. The speaker ruled out doing it both ways, and I think waiting until December 11th is a long time to wait to address that. But certainly the president still believes there is no problem. The American people completely disagree with him, and we will have an intelligence briefing to the entire Congress tonight. And but I presume we will take some action this week. But at the end of the day, it's the commander-in-chief, the gentleman running the refugee system, the one who says we need no changes. He is either tone deaf or otherwise. And so I presume we're going to take action this week. And based on intelligence, we might take action on the appropriations bill if the president fails to lead once again.
Okay. Yes, front row here.
A majority of GOP voters think that immigration rates are too high. That's driven predominantly by green cards and legal immigration. Senator Rand Paul has proposed that we suspend all visa issuances to Muslim countries with jihadist movements. And so I was wondering if I could just get a show of hands, and of course you can elaborate later, of how many of you on stage would be willing to support a suspension or reduction to Muslim immigration as Rand Paul has suggested. And those of you who don't raise...
I don't answer questions from you because you are not a truthful reporter, and I will not answer any of your questions. So
Wait,
let's
I'm
go
sorry.
to somebody else.
Could you tell me what I've reported that's not truthful?
And you guys won't change your reporting, so...
Do you
We can take that up afterward. Let's not get into a debate in front of her.
Okay, so you're not willing to commit as to whether you would support Rand Paul's?
I'm not talking to you.
Okay.
Hi, Tom Howell, Washington Times. The reconciliation bill that you passed sent over to the Senate to repeal parts of Obamacare, defund Planned Parenthood, has run into snags both procedurally with the Byrd rules, politically. Where does that leave you guys? Are you feeling frustrated? What would you like to see happen on the other side of the Capitol? Do you wish you had sent something else over?
Been told by some GOP senators that there are procedural tools available to the majority leader in the Senate that would allow him to bring legislation to the floor even if they still have the 60-vote threshold and the filibuster rule. And I've been told that there are some GOP senators that are frustrated that some of these tools are not being used by the majority floor leader. I don't know what those tools are. The ways of the Senate are mystifying to the House and vice versa. Yet, this is a senator who supports the filibuster and supports retention of the 60-vote rule, yet is concerned that the majority leader is not using all the tools at his disposal to bring legislation to the floor. So I would suggest that when you have an opportunity to have this kind of a conversation over in the Senate, that you ask them and explore with them what some of those tools are, so that you can enlighten us as well.
Well, certainly a full Obamacare repeal should have been, in my opinion, where we should have headed in the House. Leadership did not want to do that, but I think they would have had the 51 votes to do that. Whether or not they can now, it seems to me and most of my constituents is there's always an excuse to do nothing in the Senate, always an excuse. And the reconciliation was held out there to those of us that came in 2010. Well, in 4 years, or after 4 years, this is going to be the ticket to a vote. And now they found yet another excuse. And again, a full repeal. I mean, we had 3 or 4 senators predicted this would happen weeks ago. And the House leadership continued down the route that created some of these problems. But at the end of the day, don't forget who's calling the shots in the Senate. It's a gal by the name of Elizabeth, who's a staffer over there. Parliamentarian. She works at the pleasure of the Senate Republicans. They adopted these rules, and they're I think the same rules that Harry Reid had, and so the onus is on their leadership and to move forward on that. But this is entirely predictable and unacceptable.
Let me weigh in real quick, Tom. I don't regret sending that over. There's time for the Senate to do their job.
As a follow-up to his question, if, as I've seen reported, the Senate Republicans do remove the Planned Parenthood language from the reconciliation bill, would you be disappointed with that? Is there another vehicle then that you would pursue defunding of Planned Parenthood? Do you want it to remain part of reconciliation?
I would be disappointed, but that was never going to be signed into law. Everybody knows that. The question is to get to the president's desk. If you want to not fund Planned Parenthood, you don't fund them, like happened in the 10-week appropriations bill, and you don't do it in the 42 weeks in the omnibus. And that's pretty simple. That's the only must-pass legislation out there. There are some suggestions that they'll play around on this long enough that the Planned Parenthood issue, when the last must-pass legislation leaves the House and Senate, goes to the president, the omnibus, that is the only way to not fund Planned Parenthood, and so this reconciliation was never going to do that, and but we do need to put it on the president's desk, and particularly the full Obamacare repeal as well.
What he said.
Okay. Yes, over here, ma'am. Yes.
Thanks. I'm Sabrina Eaton from the Cleveland Plain Dealer. What are your thoughts on the legality of the military strikes that we've done against ISIS, and have your thoughts on this changed at all since the attacks in Paris?
Your thoughts on the legality of the military strikes against ISIS? Congressman Jones?
I'll go back to the point I made earlier that, it's easy to criticize the president, but we also have a responsibility. I already mentioned that the Constitution says the legislative branch will discuss, I'm paraphrasing again, the justification of whether we do or whether we do not. So for me personally, we have been trying for a year and a half, to get a debate on the floor about a new authorization of military force as it relates to Syria, and then now it goes into Iraq again. And we are not doing our job. That's my personal feelings, but I have had the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Chuck Krulak, my advisor on the Middle East, and he has said, he's retired now, you in Congress need to follow the Constitution when it comes to sending our young men and women to die for this country.
Any other thoughts on Congressman Massey?
I'll just say I agree with Walter Jones, and I've been part of his efforts to get this to a vote on the floor. In 2013, the president came and asked for an AUMF, and it didn't happen. He couldn't even get the Democrats to vote with him at that time. In 2014, he came and asked for an AUMF. He knows he needs something from Congress. He's clinging to the 2002 and 2003 AUMFs, which, in my mind, pretty clearly don't cover what he's doing now, the expansion of his activities. And then he's also got this side project of taking out Assad, which we have never authorized, and yet we've funded it. I can't say to what degree, but it's been in the classified funding, And that needs to stop as well. If we get involved in Syria, the first thing we need to do is quit doing the covert operations in Syria, where we are funding, essentially giving weapons to ISIS through other channels in order to destabilize Assad, which is what has happened, whether that was the intention or not. We need to stop that program immediately.
Other questions? Yes, in the back.
Hi, Mary Berger with Washington Trade Daily. The President released the text of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement a couple weeks ago. I know it's a lot to read, but I'm wondering if anyone has a reaction to it, and if you think that there will be a unified conservative position, or does this come down to something where it depends on whether it's good or bad for your individual districts?
I had that question quite a few times at town halls this past week, and what I told them and tell you, I've got to read the thing first. And it is a big document. I've read selected sections, and which would improve on the situation and allow some of our Kansas products probably sold around the world. However, have to read it, and that's why we changed the rules, so you can actually read it before the president actually signs it. Again, it's a massive document, and it will take a lot of reading, but I withhold judgment until we get a chance to read that, and I think we have a long ways to go. It will take a lot of time to digest, and apparently a lot of folks, outside groups apparently have some opinions yet, but I doubt anybody other than the negotiators have actually read it and digested the entire document.
Congressman Brown.
Yeah, on the trade, a couple issues. Obviously, I haven't read it all the way through, but one of the problematic issues I see is the U.S. Trade Representative I think, has said it's like the game where all the kids play with all that. You build a house out of toothpicks, and he said if you pull one toothpick out, the whole trade agreement falls apart, right? So I'm a free trader, did economics, know all the nice attributes of trade. But why free trade takes thousands and thousands of pages, and one of these gigantic bills again, where if one toothpick comes out, the whole framework collapses, is problematic to me from the start. And then if you want to get specific, you can kind of look at the Japanese auto piece. We're bending over backwards there for some reason. You can never see the crony aspects or the crony deals where the trade-offs involved, right? If we're doing that for them, what are we getting back out of it? It's very hard to analyze those issues. And then finally, some of the presidential candidates who are running, and all the rest should be, linking trade to foreign policy and our position in the world. So why a trade bill just deals with trade is getting the American people's attention right now. We have a problem across the world now with the Middle East, with Russia, with China. We may only have a few decades left where we are the only superpower in the world and the only super economy in the world, where we can help to educate and set up good institutions in these countries with respect to trade and the military and rule of law, et cetera. So while we have this unique place in history to just write narrow trade agreements that just have to do with business interests, when this is one of the biggest levers of power we have to get our way on behalf of the interests of the rest of the world, setting up good governance across the world. And so until I see trade linked in that way, I'm going to have some huge reservations about just doing these narrow trade bills that are connected in haphazard fashion.
Congressman King.
Thank you. I want to just add a point here that I hope people are paying attention to. That is a part of an agreement with the Trade Promotion Authority. There are two amendments that were introduced into and passed by the House in the Customs Bill. They were agreed to by the Senate and the White House, and the Customs Bill sits out there yet, waiting to come to the floor as a conference report. But those two amendments, one of them prohibited climate change from being negotiated under any trade agreement that's negotiated under Trade Promotion Authority, and the other one prohibited any immigration from being part of any negotiations with under Trade Promotion Authority. So I'm looking forward to that bill coming to the floor, getting an affirmative vote and a signature from the president before I can consider the TPP or any other trade agreement. Thank you.
And what was it, Mary? Mary, you said. I'm missing what you're saying. It is Mary. I'm correct. All right.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, forgive me. I'm old. So I went into the SCIF, Secure Classification Information Facility, while the document was being prepared and being negotiated. 736 pages, 2 books about this tall. They had an executive summary of 100 pages. I read every single page, and I share some of the concerns up here. My district, Mary, and to answer your question directly, or is it going to depend on each individual district, I think that's probably correct. My district on the Gulf Coast, upper Gulf Coast of Texas, has 5 ports, more than any other member of Congress. Some have 4, but I have 5. A lot of energy, a lot of exports go out of my district, and it means a lot of jobs. Climate change was one of the things, Representative King, I had a question about after having read the executive summary from front to back. There were some other issues I have, 150 different, as you know, trade categories, 11 nations. And so I think everybody looks at it in their district and they say, okay, whether it's the automotive piece, not a lot of auto manufacturers down in the Galveston, Houston area. You look at the agricultural pieces, you look at all of those different pieces to the puzzle, and then you make a decision. If there's 150 different categories, what is your threshold? Is it 76 good, 74 bad? I mean, that's kind of the process. We're currently going through the thing and trying to make sure for our district in Texas, does it mean a good, stable economic relationship with a lot of other countries? And I'm hastened to add, from a foreign policy perspective, I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee, we want to be in the driver's seat over there in these economies with these countries, and not China. That in and of itself, one of the, I think, was it the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, one of the high-ranking generals about 2 months ago said, one of the best foreign policies we can have is a robust trading arrangement with the country, because you're less likely to attack or be attacked by a country you're doing a lot of your trading partner. Thank you, Mary.
Yes, in the back, Josh.
Back to the appropriations process.
Your name?
Oh, Josh Shepard with Bond for Life. Back to the appropriations process. You'd mentioned about the omnibus bill that will soon potentially combine the outstanding appropriations bills. Could you give us your perspective on that process, as well as are there any policy riders that you're advocating for, such as defunding Planned Parenthood?
Policy-wise, the leadership offices have, or rather process-wise, leadership offices are having these listening sessions with rank-and-file members on different components of the bill. Today there's a listening session so the rank-and-file members can come in and talk about what riders they would like with regard to the financial services section of the bill. Tomorrow there's one on the interior and environment component of the appropriations bills. So I like the process of allowing us input. I will certainly be going to as many of those listening sessions as I can. I intend to weigh in very heavily on the interior and environment component. And I expect those discussions to be very robust. For those of us who want to weigh in on riders, I think it's going to obligate us to get a lot of support for those, so we can hope to accomplish the heavy lift at the end of the day.
Following up on that, there are plenty of riders I'd like to see in there, and the appropriations committee's meetings that the Congresswoman discussed, or many of those will be, but a couple things. Pro-Life Caucus has 3 riders we're looking for, which would include ANDA and Mexico City policy, as well as state option Medicaid providers, which would impact perhaps Planned Parenthood and other providers. Also, the refugee issue, I think, would probably come up, as well as and quite a few EPA issues. And the appropriations process was ended in July by the former and it's time to restart that. One thing I think I can say publicly, the speaker noted that this process is going to be open up whether you like it or not. Those are not his words; those are mine. We're going to open up this process. So these type of amendments that have been withheld and rejected and not permitted on the floor of the House since I've been here in 4.5 years are now going to be fair game for debate in the appropriations process next year.
There were, don't think that's my microphone, but there were at least 4 riders that passed this summer as part of the appropriations process dealing with privacy and NSA reform. A lot of those received votes and overwhelming majorities on the floor, and I would like to see those. I'm on a letter with Jared Polis urging our leadership to include those in the final bill. And I hope they don't get washed out because of the current issues of the day. I mean, these are issues that are timeless. Our constitutional right to due process, right to privacy.
Many of you have spoken about the need to avoid that last-minute situation with these major bills. What are your expectations in terms of how much debate you'd like to see on the omnibus before we are up against the December 11th deadline? I mean, should it be on the floor the week 30th to begin? Okay. Okay, any other questions we have? Well, thank you all for coming today. Thank you, members of Congress, Chairman Huelskamp, for hosting today's meeting. As I said earlier, you can find a recording of this on YouTube later today. You can be in touch with the press secretaries that are on the advisory for more information. Thank you all for coming.